Okay, so I just got home from work. I know it is no longer Halloween, but...
You can tell. You can tell. If you look carefully, there's something unusual about her parents because she just got home from work.
Yeah, last week I taught a lesson about Halloween, and the students didn't celebrate it at all around here. So I think they were kind of pumped up to do something for it. So this week is when we celebrated Halloween. So yeah, it was awesome. The kids had so much fun. They were running around, screaming, popping balloons, and it was great. So some of them actually did have masks. So yeah, that's nice. I wasn't expecting that. But so, yeah, somebody had left a comment on one of your videos asking about my experience moving to China and becoming an ESL teacher.
Right.
So I was just thinking, I'm looking down because I made notes on my phone. So.
She did prep for this video. My stuff is normally 100% spontaneous. This is only 80% spontaneous. But
yeah, well, I kind of have trouble with being spontaneous on camera.
So a little bit of background, though. So, your decision to come to China and be a teacher itself was spontaneous. She fell in love with me. She came over here, and I said, look, I can set you up with a job as a teacher. Now, if we're being all the way real, that is fundamentally just because you speak English as a first language and you're in a part of China where teachers are really, really scarce. If you're watching this in 2017... the next 2 years, 2018, 2019, teachers are going to be scarce in almost all of China. There have been legal changes and bureaucratic changes in how they can recruit and employ and do paperwork for foreign teachers. So there's a crisis going on right now in higher education in China, in lower education, in all kinds of education, because they really took for granted that they'd be able to get foreigners to come here and teach. And it's basically impossible now. It's impossible. I'll just say this briefly. Sorry, don't worry, this is our video. But it's possible. It's impossible partly for those reasons of bureaucracy, paperwork, visas, the regulations changing. But it's also economically. Today, again, so I was talking to her boss today, and she was again inviting me to stay longer and set me up with work and stay here as a teacher. And I said to her, look, there's no way to justify it. Even if you wanted to teach English in order to learn Chinese, you'd do it in Taiwan. For all these reasons, everything, including your ability to have a cell phone, your ability to have a driver's license, or, all kinds of technical things like that. But fundamentally, the money, the economics of the situation, it becomes impossible to justify teaching English in China, in mainland China.
Absolutely.
And among the only exceptions, when I was in Kunming, there's a certain stereotype of these retired white guys who are 63 to 65, doing the English teaching at that end of their lives, and they have no academic background or whatever related to teaching, and they're not career teachers, but they're this kind of sunset teacher. So, and obviously at the opposite extreme, you get people who are still in university or just finished their BA, who are here to teach English, but really because they're learning Chinese. But anyway, so really spontaneously she came over, her first experience with teaching, and you didn't have a hell of a lot of experience with kids in general, and so now now we're going to talk about it. I mean,
right.
in the space of 6 months.
Yeah, so when I first came over and visited Eisel, I was offered 3 different jobs.
Yeah.
And
that's right. Sorry, I forgot about that. That's right. But no, as soon as you were here.
Yeah, having an English degree isn't very profitable in the United States, and technically it's not really profitable here, but it is more in demand here because people want people who can speak English fluently. So I did interview for a position that was I felt would be too many hours, and I think Eisel did make a video about that job posting.
Oh, right.
It was at a technical
college.
Really,
that would have been university level teaching. So she was offered a job teaching university age students.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but the job that I took was with a fellow professor who teaches at the same college that Eisel teaches at. So
a university professor who set up a small private school, or busiban, if you know the industry terms, as a for-profit enterprise on the side, right?
Yep. So that's just teaching children. So, so the reason why I started writing these notes was, I had that comment on my mind, but also I am now tutoring I think she's probably 21 or something, but she has graduated from college and she's hoping to go to graduate school for English. So she has to take this test, an English proficiency test. So I'm tutoring her for this test, and the other day she was expressing, she was lamenting how difficult it is for her and how she doesn't think she's going to do well on the test, and she's thinking maybe she'll just forget about the graduate degree altogether. So, I was trying to encourage her, like, this is good for your career to be learning English if this is what you want to be doing. And generally in China, it's beneficial to know English. Yeah. Okay.
So what you making this video, having had the contrasting experience of teaching small children and now also dealing with this one university age student in one-on-one special classes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So she asked me if I had hesitated with coming to China and becoming a teacher for this, ESL teaching. I didn't, I couldn't explain the full situation to her because it's like,
it would be X-rated.
Yeah. But I said, there was some hesitation in the very beginning, but it wasn't about teaching. It was sure. About making this huge move.
Well, it was about reassuring your parents that life in China was not really so different from life in the United States.
Yeah.
And by the way, just off hand real quick, a lot of people will be disappointed with that. I knew a girl, and my whole life would be different if I'd pursued a relationship with her. I knew a girl who was half Chinese in Canada. This is way back in the day. And I remember her saying to me, she's not the only person to talk, but obviously ethnically she was half white, half Chinese. And when she came to China, the big disappointment was it was not that different from Canada. Like fundamentally, the buildings, the streets, the fire hydrants, like in so many ways, life is the same as in Canada. So that just mentioned offhand. But in a lot of ways, that's what I was kind of reassuring your parents. I showed them some photographs of where I live and stuff.
Yeah,
and it's no, I mean, day to day, it's really in so many ways, it's not that different from the life you might have in the United States.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, so, I said to her, ultimately my decision was an emotional one, so I can't really compare it. I can't say that would work in her situation, because for me it was an emotional decision to move here and, first of all, to come meet you, and then to move here. And so it's a totally different decision for her. It's a career decision. It's something that she should think about rationally. And, of course, I know there are emotions that are going to be wrapped up in her decision.
But you have, after the short-term emotional decision, now we have a ton of more long-term decisions that get informed by it. You now have the option to learn Chinese over the next year or next 5 years or whatever, whatever you want to do. It's not a rush, but for the rest of your life, if you want to, you can learn Chinese. And due to circumstances in our lives, if you want to, you can learn French. If you want to, you can learn German. We could learn Spanish. We don't really have a reason to learn Spanish at the moment. But I'm just mentioning, it does open up doors for you that you will now consider in a more cerebral, analytical way with reference to your career. So, the fact that the short-term decision is emotional doesn't... Yeah, that's all I'd say. Yeah.
Yeah. So I said, I probably wouldn't have come over to China had I not known Marang, if I wouldn't have known you. So I said, for me, it's an emotional decision. So, but apart from coming here and falling in love with you, it has been a really meaningful experience for me. Really meaningful life experience. So generally, an interesting point for me is that I hadn't had much interaction with people who weren't native English speakers. So I've had some embarrassing misunderstandings with people when I talk to them. But it's been good for me overall to gain this skill of communicating with people for whom English isn't their first language. Yeah. Just generally, I think that's a good communication skill to have. Yeah. A good life skill to have. And also, even talking to people with whom English is their first language, in a way, to avoid misunderstandings or.
Maybe I can poke in some little things here as you go, but I think one of the ways in which we both break the stereotype of English teachers here, I don't think anyone's really interrogated you about this. I get it all the time. A lot of Chinese people will take you aside and ask you, don't you worship Chinese culture? Aren't you here because you love Chinese culture? And what they mean by Chinese culture is interesting. Sometimes that's kind of a code for something political. Sometimes it's a code for they really mean high literature or opera, Chinese opera. They might have something in particular in mind. But every single time I get asked that, I tell people no. I'm not an enthusiast about Chinese literature or Chinese opera. No, I don't worship Chinese culture. I'm here for this, and this reason, which would be a separate video. But, I think it's interesting. Both of us were in this, frontier region of China. This part of China basically only became a part of China around 1911. It's a bit of a secret, it says, this is a ethnically diverse, lingually diverse area on the edge of Yunnan and Myanmar. Beautiful, great place to live, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. But it is interesting. We took on the challenge of being here and we're not the stereotype that Chinese people themselves are looking for. Because a lot of the time, that's what they're looking for is the kind of white follower. It's hard to describe. Sorry, I mean, there are slang terms for this with white people who worship Japanese culture, like otaku and this kind of thing. But I don't really know any simple slang term with that for white people who, for whatever reason, are drawn to or fascinated with and want to integrate into or marry into, Chinese culture. But that ain't us.
Yeah,
we're here for such a totally different set of reasons. But yeah, it's cool. It's cool for you to say it's been life changing, but it's life changing in a very different way than might be the stereotype that even other Chinese people here would expect.
Yeah. No, I thought that was just funny. It was relevant because I just was tutoring the college graduate that recently have started tutoring, and we were talking about history. Like history was the subject that we were talking about. And I was like, I'm just now learning about Chinese history because I really don't know very much about it. And I said, Ma Daing knows a lot more about it, and she was like, oh yeah, well he must. He's a university professor. So yeah, I kind of did encounter that she expected you to be really more into Chinese culture than.
Well, and just a really brief thing, they assume that going to an American high school, you'd learn about the history of China, and most people learn nothing.
Yeah,
most Americans don't even know which side China was on in World War II. They don't even know that. And so my first university degree is political science, and I do sometimes describe myself as a political science major, sometimes as an Asian studies major because I've got a second degree going. But yeah, there is definitely, because they feel China is the center of the world. If you don't know the actual symbols, Zhongguo pretty much means that the
land.
Yeah. So that's kind of coded in the country. But yeah, they have much higher expectations than most English teachers to be able to live up to that way.
Yeah. So, another general note is that I wouldn't have learned Chinese. I really doubt I would have learned Chinese ever had I not come over and become an ESL teacher here. And as you just said a couple minutes ago, that it can be a lifelong language for me. And
I just want to say I have never put pressure. I've never said to her if you fall in love with me, you have to learn Chinese. Which and a lot of relationships are like that.
No, but it is true that you've said I think you would regret it if you lived here and you didn't learn some Chinese to know what you're missing.
That's right. That's the criterion I use is learning enough to know what you're missing.
Yeah,
because if you choose not to learn Chinese after you leave here, I can respect that decision, but you got to know enough to know what you're saying.
Yeah, and it's true. I feel like I could have spent more time learning Chinese.
Sure.
I hope I in the future, spend more time learning Chinese.
Well, and me too, real briefly, but I mean, since she came into my top priority has been her not learning Chinese. Before that, I had a period of 7 months where learning Chinese, 7 or 8 or 9 months even, where learning Chinese was my main priority, and then she became my main priority, and that's fine. I think she's going to be with me for the rest of my life. Whether or not the Chinese language is going to be with me for the rest of my life, well, we're always going to actually more open to speculation. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And also, just the other part of that is I had learned German in high school because it was necessary. It was a requirement to learn some language, and I had German background. I had some family in Germany, so. But yeah, this is something I was doing out of not duty, but out of just interest and.
Right.
Yeah. So okay. All right. So on to being a teacher. Being a teacher doesn't really come naturally to me.
Yeah.
You recently commented on this that there are some things that generally I'm good at, but teaching is not really one of them.
I just mention really briefly what it is she's alluding to, or what I'm alluding to when I say that. I really mean the kind of master of ceremonies role of the teacher, where you stand in the front, you keep the class's attention.
Right.
And I wouldn't say it's about being entertaining, because I don't see the role of a teacher as being entertaining your students, but really just how you project your voice, how you work the room. It's in some ways, it's similar to stand-up comedy without jokes. It's stand-up comedy without punchlines. But how you do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And before I came to Asia to teach English, when I was still in Canada, but I knew I would. By the way, I'm not a career English teacher. Sorry if this is the first video you ever see on my channel. I've taught English in between other jobs and for other reasons. Like I was in Cambodia trying to do humanitarian work, and in between jobs I taught English for a little while, stuff like that. But the English teaching is my career. But nevertheless, when I knew I was going to move to Asia, and I knew that teaching English would be part of my life in Asia, there was a short-lived kind of documentary TV show. This is before reality TV. It was a documentary, and I think it was just called Taiwan English Teachers. I think it was something like that. And I remember one of the characters, he just seemed like such a pathetic drunk. He just seemed like, why would anyone want this guy's name? He seemed so worthless. And then the last episode, I only saw a couple of those, but I did see the last episode. They actually showed him waking up hungover, late, getting his act together, dragging his ass to school to teach. And he was teaching children. But then when he stands in front of the kids, he's great. He's kind of a natural just in that sense. I'm not saying he's great at teaching grammar, or I'm not saying he's great at terms of actually getting kids to practice speaking English, but you can see he really had that thing. I mean, it's like Krusty the Clown of The Simpsons. He comes on stage and says, "Hey, kids," and he is really good at naturally kind of holding the class's attention.
Yeah. Which I think you are. I think you're really good at that. Like because he was doing my job basically for me before I moved over here. Like I was in America for 2 months, and so
and I did it in a transitional way. I did it to sort of train her and bring her in. I assume you're going to talk about that a little bit later.
I was going to talk about that. So
But I think there's a line from Rick and Morty, which is a TV comedy show. But Rick says at one point, he says, "Well, I can do anything, but only if I want to, like only if I'm motivated to." For me, a lot of the challenge in English teaching is I write lessons and I develop curriculum intentionally that I'm interested in, that I really feel there's value in, so I'm motivated. But if I think what I'm teaching is crap, so I'm not the best teacher that way. You know what I mean? And I don't. So I'm a little bit like Rick from Rick and Morty.
Yeah, on a fundamental note, I have my voice is not very loud.
Yep.
That's just something that innately you can't change. So.
She doesn't
you have
project
a very booming, projecting voice.
Right. And here, this was also true in China, and this was also true in Laos. When I taught English in Laos, it's also true that I do diglossia. I'm speaking in both languages. I'm switching back and forth between English and Chinese. And even though my Laotian, I never received a single lesson in Laotian. I was completely self-taught, but I was doing that in Lao also. So that's also very different from just teaching in English, which is what she does. She's an English teacher who only speaks English, not Chinese.
Right. So, I don't think I would have had, if I would have gone to Asia, because it's something I could have done with an English degree. If I would have decided to move to Asia and become an ESL teacher somewhere else other than here in Mangsha, I would not have had as good of an experience as I have had here. One, because of that, because you were able to help me transition into becoming an English teacher here. Like, I was able to observe you teaching lessons, and then when I started teaching, you watched a couple...
right.
You were there, and you were able to give me some feedback.
Right. We did some lessons where I taught 100%, and she just sat there and watched and did nothing. We did some that were hybrid, where we were both teaching, or we were teaching cooperatively. She played one role, I played, to some extent. Maybe she just read a script, and I did other, interactions with the students. And then we did a couple classes where she was, for the most part, teaching. Maybe I was just helping to explain some things in Chinese.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I think that was a really good way for me to transition into teaching, because I think in other places I wouldn't have had somebody to help me train. I would have just been thrown into it. And the person who just started working for Grace, he didn't have that transitional period.
Right. So she just hired someone who,
Yeah. He did have experience teaching, but only classes of 5 or 6 students. But these classes
and he had experience in Russia, I take it. Not in, right. Well, and also just say, generally, my MO there was I tried to give her the education and the preparation that I think everyone in the business knows new teachers should have, but nobody ever gets. You know what I mean? It's like, in theory, teachers should go through a gradual process of getting it. And it never happens. So I just say I think I did kind of the obvious thing that most people, if you have experience in the industry, this is what you ought to do, but nobody does. And, I just mentioned also you were not in a corporate setting. I mean, it wasn't like you had a boss trying to get the most money out of you. That's also a big difference.
Right. So now I am teaching with a translator, so that is different. Just fundamentally, the classes are quite different. But okay. I was gonna say something else, but now I can't remember. Anyway, all right. So I do have some background in performing arts. I was in choir, and I did play violin in the orchestra in high school. And whatever. It was mostly high school. I did play some solos for competitions, some violin solos, but other than that, I really don't have experience performing in front of an audience. And I know it's an audience of children, but for me that is I don't even want to say it's I don't get stage fright. It's just stressful for me, like, because it doesn't come naturally to me, and trying to keep the attention of kids is tough.
So you were out of town when this happened. When I first started teaching here at the university, it really brought back memories of the theater and of doing stand-up comedy and doing comedy as an actor and stuff, because the actual setup of how the desks are, how the students are sitting, and sometimes I stand behind the podium and sometimes I walk down into the crowd and speak to them. Sometimes you speak to people one-on-one. It's like a stand-up comedian, and sometimes you're addressing kind of everyone and anyone. It just really brought back memories from when I was like 16 years old at the theater. So yeah, there's definitely theatricality to it, even when you're doing a completely dry. I mean, you're not acting out scenes or anything.
Yeah, right. But also, for the kids, there are scenes that I should be acting out, and that was a new experience for me because I hadn't ever been in theater.
And you sing some songs and things with them.
Yeah, sing songs, which is fine. But but just when I first was doing the story about Hans and the gold, like you actually like wrote for me mime, putting the gold on his back and like carrying it and riding a horse and stuff I hadn't had that experience in the past. So
I could say, so when she first started teaching, I was really accustomed to, while talking to the class, like while keeping eye contact, drawing a picture on the board that illustrates what I'm talking about, while holding eye contact, while keeping their attention, doing mimetic motions, miming out what the verb is, what it is I'm trying to get across. So that comes to me very easily.
And you're really good at drawing, okay, I think he's good at drawing.
She I mean, whatever. I'm good enough, but yeah, I could spontaneously draw. And again, it's related to nouns and verbs or the situation you're trying to convey. But that is. I mean, at this level, at all levels, even with university students, that's it's important. An important set of skills. But yeah.
Well, yeah, and it's just really tough for me to draw at all. So I can't. Simultaneously talk to the class and draw. And
it's even if you're just asking them, like if you're just asking something really simple, like, do you know what this is, while you're drawing, but you are, you're not looking at the board, you're still looking at them, you're still involving them, trying to keep them engaged, trying to keep them learning. Because again, what I do, I don't try to be entertaining. I really don't. I don't try to make my students happy. I ultimately, I've prepared a lesson that I feel is really worth conveying. So just to give a really true example, because we both did these lessons, I did a series of lessons on the Inuit. So AKA Eskimos, the furthest north people in Canada, how they live and how they survive, how they build a house out of snow and ice and this kind of thing, And to me, like, I really think that's worth conveying to those kids. I think it's worth conveying to university. Like, to me, this is really meaningful. So I'm motivated, I'm engaged. But then also remember, what are they learning? They're learning cut ice. How do they cut drag? Like, a lot of this is verb. Learning the differences between the different verbs. What does it mean to push something or to drag something? And all of that's going to be very mimetic. It's going to be acting things out and so on. So yeah, when you came in, I think that was probably exactly the transition. You participated in a lot of those lessons. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, and I also think it has to do with like you're more comfortable being the center of attention in that way than I am.
Yeah, but again, so look, I'm now 39 and she's now 24. I don't know how different I would have been at 24 if I were doing this. So I started university in 1997, and I first taught English. No, I first taught English actually at the end of university, right? So yeah. So I did go through some of that stuff yours. That's true. Yeah. But yeah, so partly it is just that we're different people, but partly, I have a huge amount of experience with language learning, and then a smaller amount of experience within that with language teaching.
So I just had a note here that most of my professional jobs have been in an office setting, and like generally talking to people as little as possible to get the job done, and often like that was beneficial for the job to not talk to the clients. I worked for a psychologist and I wasn't supposed to. I just wanted them to fill out the paperwork. I wasn't supposed to talk to them for 20 minutes or whatever. So yeah, this is just to say that in the past I didn't really gain experience socializing or being somebody who's outgoing. Now as a teacher, I'm not saying you have to be like a socialite, but you have to be more outgoing and more approachable than sitting at an office silently. So, I think that has been a good experience for me. I think like to be more outgoing and more open to to that. Also, I had never worked with children before. Not even babysitting kids. So this has been like a pretty big change for me, but I think it's great. Like today when we had this Halloween party, it was like, wow, like this is so great. Like to see kids having fun. Of course, most classes are not like as fun as it was tonight, but it is good to see them like actually seeming to learn the words, and when you actually teach them and they seem to be understanding it, it's a really it's a feeling that is, you can cherish it.
I'd say also you see that a lot. This one student you're working with one-on-one, you actually get to see her improve week by week. Here, without getting into a big thing, the students are fundamentally kind of overworked and run down.
Yes.
They're just in class for so many hours to begin with. So even the best students, I find the amount they learn in the course of, say, 2 months is shockingly slow. If I check with them, if I do a review lesson 2 weeks later, do you remember the difference between drag and push?
Yeah.
And they ain't got it. I'm like they kept ice. They remember, but wow, so a remarkable little memory retention that way. Yeah, but no, I'd say it is positive motivating when you can see the students learn. But a lot of the time, you better have other sources of positive motivation because you will not be able to see them learn. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. I was just thinking about that more. Oh yeah, just the range of ages of students here too that I teach is like from, I've taught students that are 6 years old up to students who are like 14 years old. And also like with lesson planning, it's been important. Like you've taught me like that you should be sympathetic to your audience and be thinking about how they would react and how they would better learn. Like when I first started lesson planning, I started making things that were interesting to me and maybe directed towards somebody who was probably more college age, or like high school age. And I really needed to think about it differently and focus my attention on like how the kids will react in the different age groups.
Yeah, it's a really weird example. I have this catchphrase at the time, which is that sympathy is especially important as an analytical tool, but it is a weird thing. We just have to think through from the student's perspective which parts of this are difficult and which are easy, and what how are they going to perceive this. There's a lot that goes into it in a split second, because once you're used to doing it, you don't even realize you're doing it. I remember she was designing a lesson about the planets and the solar system. And from my perspective on it was just 180 degrees different from hers. So it was like, no, to a child, this isn't what's interesting, this is. And, if the point is to teach them these words, then it can't also be to teach these words. It's just interesting. But yeah, there's definitely an art to curriculum generation. And this year, both of us, we 100% generated all new curriculum. We didn't use anything from pre-existing books or any pre-existing source. And I didn't use anything from any prior year. I think I did one lesson, that was reusing something I wrote when I was in Laos. It was on the use of articles, on the correct use of the, the and and so on. Once. But otherwise, everything I've done has been 100% fresh. So we both got a lot of experience. Well, even though I already did have experience, I got more experience creating new curriculum, starting with a blank sheet of paper and thinking, okay, what am I going to accomplish in these 40 minutes with these students?
Right. Yeah, and in the same way, like you've helped me transition into that because I had no experience with it. So having that was really helpful.
I think too, it's funny because we did a whole separate video about university level education book review talk. It's called Academically Adrift, but we have a separate video recently talking about university education. It's funny too because what you're doing as a teacher, I think properly understanding what it means to be a teacher, is totally incompatible with being an academic presenting a paper at a conference. Because that is, as you say, this is me presenting what's interesting to me and me explaining to you why it's so important to me. No, the point is to start from this kind of sympathetic understanding of what the students need to know or need to learn and need to practice, and how they're going to perceive it, and to work with that perception. Which, by the way, is totally different here in China than it would be if you're working with Mexican students or Brazilian students. What they can and can't do is totally. I assume that's a topic for another video, but that really is pretty deep. Just how limited they are in apprehending the language and the lesson. You do have to think through. Like for example,
every sentence. Like
every
there are words that they won't know, and if one word they don't understand, it will make the whole sentence incomprehensible.
Right. Well, and like that's why I said, like even when we were talking about the Inuit, I'm not going to teach you some kind of ideology about the Inuit. It's like, okay, we're going to learn cut, we're going to learn drag, we're going to learn the difference between drag and push. The idea of building a house out of ice, and then it's like even that. Okay, so the structure of the sentence built out of. That was like one of the main points of the lesson was go on the board. X is made out of Y. X is built out of Y. That sentence pattern and so on. And if you don't do it step by step, then what you're doing is just gobbledygook. Yeah. So, but yeah, thinking that way to me it is really easy, and I guess I'm good at that because I spent so much time studying languages as an autodidact, Laotian, Cambodian, Pali, Kriya, but I have all this experience as a student. I guess, or maybe I'm just weird, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's definitely an invisible skill of a language teacher that you will never get from getting a PhD in linguistics. It has nothing to do with having an academic background or presenting papers at an academic conference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So just further on that topic, I think it's good for my personal development overall to see what topics and what mode of teaching will engage the different age groups. So, working with kids who are really young, I think it's important to play, to have like songs and games. Yeah. But older students, even if you do have something really interesting, and this lesson that I taught tonight, I think was the first time I really was like proud of my lesson. Like I think I did well without asking you for any help. But still, like some of the students weren't engaged. But I just think like they're in class so many hours. I actually asked them at the end of class because the sentence structure I was trying to teach them was like, I wish I wish I could do X or something. And I was like, I bet you probably wish that you weren't in class so many hours, that you weren't in school so many hours. So I was like, so when are you in class? So they start at 7:30 and they have a 2-hour break at lunch. But then they said that they end at 10 p.m. I was like, what? That's amazing.
They're signed up for some classes or program that keep them until 10 p.m.
So anyway.
And a lot of the teachers are on that similarly dehumanizing schedule. Yeah, it's awful.
Yeah. But it's just good to see how kids change throughout.
I just mentioned many English teachers in Asia instead take this kind of punitive attitude of like, well, they don't want to learn. Yeah, well, there are students who don't want to learn. There are students who 100% don't want to be there. That is true. But a lot of the time what you're perceiving as the student not wanting to learn is they've already been learning since 7:30 a.m. and you're seeing them at 8:30 p.m. Mm-hmm. And, you got to get real. You got to be able to think sympathetically about the position they're in and maybe how you would have felt at that age if you were working those same hours and so on.
Yeah.
So,
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's good also because maybe it'll help me because, helping raise Alexandra when we have her,
sure.
Seeing how the different age groups, like how to teach them things. And,
sure. But I think it is also, I mean, it's a fundamental puzzle. How do you teach someone who doesn't want to learn? With my daughter, we don't teach her anything she doesn't. We only do things she's interested in doing and teach, so she's very happy and positive motivated all the time. Right. But yeah, that's that I think that's a hurdle nobody gets over, whether at university level or preschool level.
Yeah. And I think one of the final things that I made a note of is that people who watch this YouTube channel since I've been on it, they've probably noticed that I'm not great at speaking off the cuff. It's really, I stumble on my words and sometimes just speak slowly because I'm trying to think, gather my thoughts before I say something. Or I'll just say something that I'll listen back to, and I'm just like, God, why did I say that? Why did I say it in that manner? But anyway, throughout my life, I've really relied on written language to communicate with people. Even when I had difficult arguments with my parents or something, a lot of the time I would sit in my room and I'd be like, okay, I'm gonna write out what's going on, write an apology letter to them. I don't know. That's just a way that I've often communicated in my life. So having to speak about a subject without preparation has been a new challenge for me. Yeah. And also teaching ESL has been a new challenge for me because, students will ask random questions and you have to be able to speak off the cuff and have something to say in response that isn't just like, oh, I don't know, or like, and say it in a way that also the students would be able to understand. Yeah. So, yeah, I think it's been a good experience for me. I don't know if I've improved. Maybe objectively, the audience can tell more than I can, but I think I have gotten better at.
Sure.
Speaking.
Yeah, it's a real workout for those improv skills and stage skills and so on.
Yeah. So anyway,
cool.
Yeah, I think it's taken me out of my comfort zone being an ESL teacher, and I think I've been growing as a person. So.
Great. I think, if anyone watching this video who's actually interested in teaching English in China, or all of Asia, I guess. I mean, in the last 17 years, between the year 2000 and the year 2017, we've really seen, I think, English teaching cease to be an uncredentialed profession. It used to be kind of the last Wild West, the last frontier, where somebody with no formal education could be great at the job and have a good career and earn a good living. That used to be true. I mean, like, as let's say 2005, to pick a year. That really used to be true. And I mean, I alluded to it briefly earlier, because the Chinese government has ratcheted up the paperwork requirements and bureaucratic requirements. Yeah. At one point, your boss here was offering to employ you on paper as a secretary, as an administrative, so that like the school would be pretending they were employing an American citizen as an administrator because they couldn't get through the paperwork to employ you as a teacher. Ridiculous. Now, there are all kinds of, details of that. So, it's really a shame from my perspective. Maybe someone else, I don't see anything positive about the I really don't. I think it's really important in every society that you have real careers that people can try and succeed at, but not everyone's going to succeed without this pile of credentials. And it's funny because just having talked about it so much, a lot of the talents you need to be a good language educator are not academic. They're not academic in nature. I mean, what you need to know about grammar, you could probably pick up in 2 months or something. It's probably not that deep. Now, I'm someone who really enjoys, I'm a very unusual, I enjoy talking about grammar. I enjoy thinking about whether I'm talking about grammar in an ancient Indian language like Pali or Sanskrit or Latin or Greek or, or English or, these Asian languages I've studied or Korea or Ojibwe. I'm a very unusual person that way. But I recognize, first of all, I'm not a perfect teacher. I know there are shortcomings. But of the skills I have, what's important in being a teacher, I'm not using that academic research side of my brain at all. And, there are these other properties about being warm, about being engaging, about being sympathetic. Yes, also being analytical, being creative. There's a lot that goes into it. And I don't know, I feel it's a shame that now that window is closing. Fewer and fewer people will be able to do what you did, which is try it first, see if they like it, see if they're good at it before they commit to it. And instead, we're going to get the opposite scenario, which is, I think, what most American educators are trapped in, Canadian educators are trapped in, where it's like, no, commit 9 years of your life first to getting a credential so you can do this job, even though it's a low-paying job. First, commit 9 years of your life to this educational, getting these credentials that you can't use for any other job or career, and then afterwards you'll be trapped in it and won't have a choice. Mm-hmm. That's really rough. That's really terrible. And in the past, I was able to say to people, well, give it a try. Like, if you do it for 6 months, what's the big deal? You could be a teacher for 6 months. There are a lot of other things you shouldn't just try. It's not like we're talking about, race car driving or something. It's not something dangerous. It's not something destructive. It's something you can have a lot of personal growth. But, if fundamentally you decide you don't like screaming at kids or having kids screaming at you, which is part of the job, you could have that experience and make that decision. And now, with it becoming professionalized and credentialized and so on, it's really like the worst of all worlds. If you're going to get those credentials, if you're going to put in that many years, there are other careers for you that are way more rewarding. There's almost no way to justify doing the job formally. And most of the justifications, most of the rewards for doing the job informally, whether you do it on a try and see basis or you do it like me, I'm teaching as an educational opportunity. It's really for my own education that I'm teaching. So there's a different balance of, opportunities, and there's a different balance of opportunities attached to it from that perspective. But yeah, it's a shame. Definitely back in the year 2001, there was almost like this gold rush of anyone can buy an airplane ticket and fly to Japan. Anyone can buy an airplane ticket and fly to China Taiwan, it's South Korea maybe more than anywhere else, and can not just get a job as an English teacher, but really have a career, really over time build up, a meaningful new life. And a lot of people did, and a lot of people from diverse, some of them used to be computer engineers or something. Some of them had some totally different background they were dissatisfied with. And I think right now, 2017 is really the year that game has ended. And where now it's like, no, you're supposed to have a certificate in education and
2 years experience.
2 years experience. 2 years experience in your home country, and like preferably a master's degree and so on. It cannot be justified. Don't do it. If that's the career path we're talking about, I'd say absolutely not. Not for anyone. Like absolute no matter who you are. The only way to justify that is if you open your own business, and then you don't need the credentials anyway. If you're the one who owns the school, if you're doing a private for profit basis. So yeah, changing world and the changing face of my girlfriend. Yeah, but in some ways, it's great to hear that from you, babe. It's great to hear that you feel you got a lot out of it. And as with earlier, I said learning Chinese. It's good to know what you're missing. I mean, even if you close the door on this, if for you this really decides for you that long-term teaching is not what you want to do, you take what you learn from this and then you move on, really knowing what it is you're missing.
Yeah.